The grand ballroom was glittering that night, chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, catching the light of crystal glasses raised in laughter. Millionaire Richard Caldwell loved nothing more than showing off his wealth, and tonight was no exception. He was hosting a charity gala for the city's elite, a chance for him to boast about his son, Andrew, the future heir to the Caldwell Empire. Guests whispered about fortunes and alliances, about which socialite daughter might catch Andrew's eye, but beneath the polished marble and golden decor, another story was quietly unfolding. In the far corner of the room, moving discreetly among the tables, was Evelyn. She was a maid, hired only recently, her uniform pressed but modest, her eyes lowered as she served wine and hors d'oeuvres. She was careful, graceful even in her small movements, though no one noticed except one or two servants who had worked beside her. They didn't know her past. To them, she was just another working girl. What no one could guess was that before fate had crushed her dreams, Evelyn had been a champion dancer. She had trained for years, had trophies hidden away in a dusty box, memories of spotlight and applause she now kept buried. Richard's booming voice pulled everyone's attention to the center of the room. He stood tall, proud, one hand resting on Andrew's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with a sly grin, "as you know, my son Andrew is a man of taste, talent, and legacy. But tonight, I thought we might have a little fun. A test of grace, a test of worth." He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the crowd with mischief. "Whoever can dance a waltz with my son tonight, impressing me enough, shall have the honor of marrying him." Laughter erupted from the crowd. Some thought he was joking, others thought it a bold challenge. Andrew's face reddened in embarrassment, but he stayed silent, used to his father's theatrics. The wealthy ladies in glittering gowns giggled, some stepping forward playfully, eager to seize the spotlight. One after another they tried, some too stiff, some too rehearsed, others too clumsy, despite their expensive lessons. Richard mocked openly, waving them off with exaggerated sighs. "No, no, no. Where is the elegance? Where is the soul? You call that a waltz?" His cruel amusement filled the room while Andrew forced a polite smile, though inside he burned with humiliation. Evelyn tried to stay out of sight, but fate rarely cooperates with silence. As she bent to pick up an empty glass, Richard's sharp eyes caught her. He saw the maid standing there, dark-skinned, humble, out of place among the glitter. And then, with a smirk, he said loudly, "You, the maid in the corner, come here." The room fell quiet, all eyes turning toward her. Evelyn froze, her heart hammering. "Me, sir?" she whispered. "Yes, you," Richard sneered. "Why not? If these so-called ladies can't manage a simple dance, perhaps our maid can give us all a laugh. Come now, dance the waltz with my son. If you do it well enough, well, who knows? You might just marry into wealth beyond your wildest dreams." The crowd erupted in cruel laughter. Whispered comments sliced through the silence. "How absurd. Imagine her as a Caldwell. This will be entertaining." Evelyn's cheeks burned and Andrew stiffened, glaring at his father. "Father, this is—" But Richard cut him off with a raised hand. "Nonsense, boy. This is a party. Let us enjoy the show." For a moment Evelyn wanted to run, to shake her head and refuse. She was a maid, not a guest. She didn't belong in that world, and humiliation was almost certain. But then something stirred inside her. She remembered the long nights of practice, the rhythm of music in her veins, the way she had once commanded the floor with elegance and strength. They wanted a laugh. They expected her to stumble, Instead, she lifted her chin, stepped forward, and placed her hand gently in Andrew's. The room gasped at her audacity. Andrew looked at her, his blue eyes full of apology. He whispered, "You don't have to do this." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "It's fine," she replied softly. "Let's give them a dance they'll never forget." The orchestra struck the first notes of the waltz. The crowd leaned in, smirking, waiting for her to falter. But as Evelyn moved, something extraordinary happened. Her steps were not clumsy or hesitant. They were fluid, graceful, perfectly timed. She glided across the floor with Andrew as though the music lived in her body. Every turn, every spin was flawless, her poise unshaken, her elegance undeniable. The laughter faded into silence as the audience realized this was no accident. The maid was not just dancing, she was commanding the floor. Andrew felt it too. He had danced with society's best, but none matched the ease and natural flow he now experienced. Evelyn guided the rhythm as much as he did, her movements light yet powerful, her presence radiant. For a moment he forgot the crowd, forgot his father's mockery. All he saw was her, shining in the music, like she was born for this. Richard's smirk wavered as murmurs rippled through the guests. "She's actually good," someone whispered. "No, she's incredible," another said, their tone almost reverent. By the time the final note rang out and Evelyn and Andrew froze in perfect stance, the room erupted not in laughter, but in stunned applause. Evelyn, breathless but composed, slowly released Andrew's hand. She bowed slightly, her expression calm, though inside her heart thundered. Andrew whispered, "That was astonishing." But before she could reply, Richard clapped his hands sharply, his voice laced with forced humor. "Well, well, wasn't that amusing? Who knew our maid had hidden talents?" His words tried to mask the truth, but the awe in the room was undeniable. For the first time that night, the power in Richard's mockery had slipped. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt alive again. The room buzzed with disbelief as the applause slowly died down. Evelyn stood with her back straight, her breathing steady, though inside she felt the rush of every eye on her. For years she had been invisible, reduced to serving trays and scrubbing floors. Yet in a single dance, she had silenced the wealthy elite who once thought her existence laughable. Andrew was still holding her hand lightly, as though afraid to let go. He leaned closer and whispered, "Where did you learn to dance like that?" Evelyn glanced at him briefly, her dark eyes shimmering with memories she rarely shared. "Long ago," she said softly, "when my dreams hadn't yet been broken." Before he could ask more, Richard's booming voice cut through the moment. "Well, that was unexpected," Richard said, clapping his hands together as though to dismiss the magic. "But let us not get carried away, ladies and gentlemen. A maid with a few fancy steps does not change her place in the world." His laugh was forced, sharper than before, but the crowd didn't respond as he expected. Instead of mocking Evelyn, many of the guests were still whispering, some glancing at her with admiration, others with curiosity. The tide of the room had shifted, and Richard knew it. Andrew frowned at his father. "You humiliated her for no reason," he said under his breath. Richard gave him a hard look. "Don't be foolish, Andrew. This was all in jest. These people expect a show." But Andrew's jaw tightened. He was no longer a boy who blindly obeyed his father's theatrics. Something about Evelyn's quiet strength had stirred his own. As the evening carried on, Evelyn tried to return to her duties, but it was impossible. Everywhere she went, eyes followed her. Some whispered compliments. She was magnificent, grace like I have never seen, while others spoke with envy, their voices dripping with condescension. It was luck, one socialite sneered. She probably rehearsed that one dance for years. Evelyn ignored them, carrying on with her trays as though she hadn't just shaken the room. But deep inside, a spark that had been buried for too long was beginning to burn again. Later that night, after the gala wound down, Andrew found her in the quiet kitchen, carefully stacking glasses. "Evelyn," he said gently, and she turned, startled. Few of the wealthy ever bothered to learn a maid's name. He hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I wanted to thank you. You didn't just save me from my father's cruel game. You showed me something I didn't know I needed to see." Evelyn gave a small smile. "You don't have to thank me. I only did what I know best." Andrew leaned against the counter, watching her with an intensity that made her uneasy yet oddly warm. "What you know best? You danced like someone who's trained their whole life. That wasn't just skill. It was passion." Evelyn's hands stilled on the glass she was holding. She didn't answer at first, her mind drifting back to the little studio she had once called home. The competitions, the applause, the moment it all fell apart when tragedy struck and forced her into a life of survival. Finally, she said quietly, "Dancing was once my life, but life doesn't always let us keep the things we love." Andrew's chest tightened at the sadness in her voice. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, the kitchen door slammed open. Richard strode in, his expression thunderous. "Andrew," he barked, "enough of this nonsense. Do you realize the kind of whispers you're feeding by being here? Talking to a maid like she's your equal?" Andrew straightened. "She deserves respect, Father. More than respect, actually. She deserves acknowledgement for what she just did. You tried to humiliate her and she turned the night into something unforgettable." Richard's face darkened. "Do not lecture me, boy. You are a Caldwell. We do not mix with the help, and we certainly don't entertain fairy tales about maids dancing their way into our family." His eyes flicked to Evelyn, sharp and dismissive. "Know your place, girl. Tonight may have entertained the guests, but do not mistake it for a change in status. Tomorrow you will be scrubbing floors again." Evelyn met his gaze calmly. She had endured worse words before, and she knew men like Richard thrived on fear. So she said nothing, only bowed her head slightly and continued stacking glasses. But Andrew saw the storm in his father's eyes, and something in him hardened. "Maybe you should be the one rethinking your place, Father," Andrew said evenly. "Because tonight, for the first time, everyone saw through your cruelty. They saw real talent, real grace, and it wasn't from the people you worship." Richard's mouth opened in shock at his son's defiance, but Andrew didn't wait. He turned and walked out, leaving Evelyn standing in the kitchen, torn between gratitude and fear. She had not meant to cause such conflict, but perhaps the truth had been waiting too long to stay silent. The next few days, the gala was the only topic among the wealthy. Stories spread quickly about how the maid had danced like royalty, about Andrew's defense of her, about the strange tension between father and son. Some mocked, some admired, but all were intrigued. Evelyn tried to disappear into her duties, yet whispers followed her everywhere. More than once she caught Andrew watching her across the estate, his gaze thoughtful, almost protective. And though she tried to remain invisible, she couldn't deny the way her heart leapt whenever their eyes met. But Richard was not a man to be undermined. In his study, he paced furiously, speaking to a close associate. "That girl is dangerous," he spat. "Not because of who she is, but because of what she represents. If Andrew continues to sympathize with her, it will tarnish everything I've built. I won't allow it." The associate nodded nervously. "What do you plan to do?" Richard's lips curled into a cold smile. "She may be good on her feet, but let's see how she dances when the ground beneath her is taken away. I'll make sure she regrets ever stepping out of line." Evelyn, unaware of the storm Richard was preparing, stood alone in her small room that night, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She touched the edge of her uniform, then closed her eyes and imagined herself once more in a gown, twirling under lights, free and proud. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a fragile thought. What if that dream wasn't dead after all? The storm Richard promised did not take long to arrive. Within a week, Evelyn noticed her hours were cut, her assignments doubled, and every mistake, no matter how small, was magnified by supervisors who suddenly carried Richard's sharp tone. Trays were heavier, hallways longer, the whispers louder. Some of the staff pitied her, some envied her, and others avoided her altogether, fearful of being caught in Richard's shadow. Evelyn endured it silently, holding herself with the same quiet grace she had shown on the dance floor, but inside, she felt the weight of her world pressing harder with each day. Andrew, however, was not blind. He watched the changes, noticed the unfair treatment, and one evening he confronted his father in the study. "You're punishing her," Andrew said bluntly. Richard didn't even look up from his glass of scotch. "I'm correcting her," he replied smoothly. "She forgot her place. I'm merely reminding her." Andrew's patience snapped. "She has more dignity in her silence than you have in all your wealth." The words startled even him, but he meant them. Richard turned slowly, his face carved with fury. "You think you're in love with her, don't you?" he hissed. Andrew did not flinch. "Maybe I am, and if I am, it's not because she danced. It's because she showed more strength in one night than I've seen in my entire life, surrounded by people like you." Richard slammed his glass down, shattering it on the table. "You will not shame this family for a maid," he thundered. But Andrew's reply was calm, steady. "Maybe it's time this family learned what shame really means." Meanwhile, Evelyn wrestled with her own turmoil. That single night of dance had awakened something she could no longer bury. In her small room, she practiced quietly in the dark, her bare feet brushing against the wooden floor as she turned and spun, her body remembering the joy that once defined her. Every step reminded her of who she had been, who she still was beneath the uniform. And yet she knew. Dreams came with costs, and her life had taught her those costs could be cruel. The true breaking point came at another gala, this one even grander, attended by dignitaries and politicians. Richard, determined to erase the memory of Evelyn's triumph, hired professional dancers to perform, dazzling the guests with rehearsed routines. Evelyn was kept far from the floor, ordered to serve at the edges, her presence a shadow. But fate has a strange way of rewriting even the most careful plans. Halfway through the evening, a murmur spread through the crowd. The professional dancers, though polished, lacked the spark of authenticity. Guests shifted, unimpressed, some whispering about that Maid from last time. Richard's smile grew tight as he overheard, his fists clenching. And then, to his horror, Andrew rose from his seat and addressed the orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andrew said loudly, his voice clear and sure, "I would like to request a dance. Not from the professionals, but from someone who reminded me, and all of us, that true talent doesn't wear wealth as its costume." His eyes searched the crowd until they found Evelyn, frozen in place, a tray in her hands. "Evelyn," he called, his voice softer now but still carrying across the hall. "Will you dance with me again?" The room gasped. Richard shot to his feet, his face crimson. "Andrew, sit down!" he roared. But Andrew ignored him. The guests, hungry for scandal and spectacle, urged Evelyn forward with murmurs and applause. For a moment, Evelyn's heart trembled. She saw Richard's fury, felt the crushing weight of judgment, and wanted to retreat. But then she met Andrew's eyes, steady, kind, unafraid. Something inside her steadied too. She placed her tray on a nearby table and walked into the center of the floor. The orchestra began, and once again Evelyn let the music flow through her. But this time it wasn't about silencing laughter or surviving humiliation. This time she danced for herself. Every step was freedom, every spin a defiance of the chains that had bound her. Andrew matched her, his movements awkward at first but guided by her grace. The ballroom transformed into something magical, the crowd leaning forward as though witnessing not just a dance, but a revelation. Richard shouted from the sidelines, his voice cracking against the tide of music and applause. "Stop this! She's nothing! She's a maid!" But his words were swallowed by the rhythm, ignored by the very guests who once hung on his every boast. They were no longer laughing at Evelyn. They were admiring her. Some even rose to their feet, clapping along, swept up in the moment. When the music ended, Evelyn and Andrew stood breathless, their hands clasped, the room erupting in thunderous applause. Guests cheered, some shouting her name, others demanding encores. Evelyn bowed her head slightly, tears threatening her composure, as Andrew whispered fiercely, "You don't belong in the shadows anymore. Not ever again." Richard stormed forward, but before he could unleash his rage, one of the city's most influential patrons stepped out of the crowd. "Mr. Caldwell," she said firmly, "if this young woman is truly in your service, then you should be ashamed. She has more grace and talent than any I've seen in years. In fact," she turned to Evelyn with a smile, "if you ever wish to return to the stage, my academy would welcome you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. An offer, public, undeniable, had just shattered Richard's attempt to bury her. Richard's face turned pale, his authority crumbling as the guests' approval shifted toward Evelyn. For the first time, he realized he had lost control. His mockery had backfired, elevating the very woman he sought to crush. Andrew placed an arm protectively around Evelyn, his expression defiant. "You tried to humiliate her, father," he said quietly, "but all you did was reveal her light." Evelyn, trembling but radiant, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, yet it carried through the silent hall. "I may be a maid, Mr. Caldwell, but tonight proved that worth isn't given by wealth, it's earned by what we carry inside. You tried to make me small, but I am not small. I am a dancer, and no one can take that away from me." The crowd erupted again, the sound drowning out Richard's silence. Evelyn stood taller than she had in years, her heart alive, her spirit unbroken. For so long she had hidden her light, but now, under the golden glow of the chandeliers, she had reclaimed it. And as Andrew squeezed her hand and whispered, "This is just the beginning," Evelyn knew he was right. Her story was no longer one of shadows. It was one of fire, rhythm, and a love that had risen from the unlikeliest of places.